He woke up before the sun most mornings. The alarm clock was old and scratched, but it did its job. The man didn't have the luxury of sleeping in. There was always something that needed to be done: lunch to pack, clothes to iron, bills to check, or simply making sure the house didn't fall apart. Life as a single parent was a full-time job, and then some. His daughter was the first thought that entered his mind every day. She was small, with a smile that could melt away his exhaustion in seconds. But raising her alone wasn't easy. Every time he looked at her, he felt both love and a heavy sense of responsibility. He knew she deserved more than what he was able to give, and that thought followed him like a shadow. He worked different jobs here and there. Nothing fancy. Sometimes he delivered packages, sometimes he fixed things for neighbors, and sometimes he even stayed late at a local store to help out. None of these jobs paid well, but together they kept food on the table and the lights on. What weighed on him most wasn't the work itself. It was the quiet moments when he wondered if he was enough for his daughter. Other children in her class talked about family trips, new toys, or the way their mom and dad helped with homework together. His daughter never complained, but he noticed how she stayed silent when those conversations came up. That silence hurt more than any long day of work. At night, after she fell asleep, he would sit in the small living room with his head in his hands. The bills would be spread out on the table. There was never enough to cover everything. He often had to make choices. Should he pay the electricity bill first or the rent? Should he buy her new shoes now or wait another month? Still, he never allowed himself to break in front of her. To her, he smiled. To her, he was strong. She didn't need to see how tired he was, how his back ached from lifting boxes, or how he sometimes skipped meals so there would be enough left for her. She was his reason to keep going. One evening, as they walked home from the park, she spotted something unusual. It was lying near a donation center, half hidden under a pile of old toys and discarded gadgets. She tugged at his sleeve and pointed. He bent down and brushed off the dust. It was a small mechanical bird, its once bright colors now faded, its body dented, and its wings stiff. It looked like it hadn't worked in years. Her eyes lit up as she whispered, "Can we take it?" He hesitated for a moment. It was broken, clearly useless. But then he saw her expression. Hopeful, innocent, full of wonder. How could he say no? He picked it up and handed it to her. "All right, let's see if we can bring this little thing back to life," he said softly. They carried it home, and she held it carefully in her hands the whole way, as if it were something precious. He knew she didn't see it as junk. She saw possibility. Children had a way of believing in broken things, of imagining what they could be instead of what they were. He wished he could see the world the same way. That night, after she went to bed, he placed the bird on the table and examined it. Its wires were exposed, the tiny circuits inside dusty and rusted. He had no real experience with machines, only the little things he had taught himself when fixing old appliances around the house. Still, something inside him whispered that he should at least try. He opened his laptop, the screen cracked on one side, and began searching for guides on how to repair small robotic toys. Most of the instructions were too complicated, full of words he didn't understand. But he didn't give up. He kept reading, watching videos, and sketching notes. Each night, after his daughter was asleep, he returned to the bird. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, he began to understand more. He cleaned the circuits, replaced a missing screw with one from an old clock, and carefully reattached the wires. It wasn't perfect, but little by little, the bird started looking less like junk and more like something with potential. Meanwhile, his daughter never stopped asking about it. Every morning she would run to the table, hoping to hear a chirp or see the wings move. When it didn't, she would sigh, but still smile, telling him, "You'll fix it, I know you will." Her faith in him gave him strength he didn't know he had. One night, as he worked on the bird under the dim light of a desk lamp, he paused and thought about his life. Maybe this wasn't just about repairing a toy. Maybe this was about proving to himself and to his daughter that even broken things could be restored. That even though life had cracked and bent them, they could still stand, still find a way forward. He gently set down the bird and looked toward his daughter's room. She was asleep, Her small figure curled up under the blanket, breathing softly. In that moment, he realized something. He wasn't just fixing the bird for her. He was fixing it for himself too. It was a reminder that he wasn't powerless, that he could still make something beautiful out of what the world had discarded. The nights grew longer, but his determination only deepened. The bird had become a symbol in their home. Whenever she asked if it was ready, he would smile and say, "Not yet, but soon." And though it remained silent for now, he believed those words with all his heart. The little bird sat on the edge of the table, its small body scratched and silent. It had been there for days now, resting among scattered tools, wires, and bits of paper with notes written in messy handwriting. To anyone else, it was just another broken toy, something not worth the effort. But in their small home, it had become more than that. The girl would check on it every morning before school. She would gently touch its stiff wing or tap its silent beak, whispering to it as if it could hear her. "Don't worry, my dad will fix you," she'd say, her voice full of certainty. That kind of faith wasn't something the father took lightly. It weighed on him, but it also fueled him. On weekends, when they went out for groceries or a walk, she carried the bird with her like a treasure. People gave them curious looks, but she didn't care. In her eyes, it wasn't broken, it was waiting. Waiting for the moment it would sing again. The father, however, felt the pressure building. He had promised her, even if he hadn't said the words out loud. Every time he saw her eyes light up when she looked at the bird, he knew there was no turning back. He couldn't let her down. Not this time. He had already tried the simple fixes. Cleaning the dust, reconnecting the loose wires, charging the tiny battery with an old phone cable. Nothing worked. The bird remained lifeless, its eyes dull, its body refusing to respond. One evening, after she had gone to bed, he sat staring at it under the dim glow of the lamp. He rubbed his tired eyes and leaned back in the chair. Maybe this was beyond him. Maybe it needed a real expert, someone who actually understood machines and coding. But then he thought about his daughter, how she had carried the bird all the way home from that donation pile, as if she'd rescued it. He remembered the hope in her voice when she said, "You'll fix it, I know you will." That memory pushed him to try again. The next day, he borrowed books from the local library about robotics and simple coding. He also searched online tutorials, staying up late into the night, watching people explain things he barely understood. Words like circuit boards and programming loops sounded foreign, but he wrote them down anyway, determined to learn. His small kitchen table turned into a workshop. Instead of plates and cups, it was covered with screwdrivers, tiny bolts, and scraps of old electronics he had collected. His daughter didn't complain about the mess. She would sit nearby, drawing pictures while he worked. Sometimes she drew herself, her dad, and the bird with bright colors, already imagining it alive again. Little by little, he made progress. He managed to fix one wing so it could move, even if it creaked loudly. He replaced a missing piece with part of an old toy car. The first time the wing twitched under his repair, his daughter squealed with joy and clapped her hands. "See, I told you it's working," she said, grinning. That moment gave him hope. If he could fix one part, maybe he could fix the rest. Still, the hardest part was the voice box. The bird had been designed to chirp, sing, and even respond in simple ways. But its small speaker was cracked, and the wires leading to its tiny computer brain were almost ruined. No matter what he tried, he couldn't make it produce a sound. There were nights he almost gave up. He would sit with his hands in his hair, staring at the silent bird as if it were mocking him. He thought about putting it away, telling his daughter it couldn't be fixed. But each time he imagined her disappointed face, his resolve came back. He couldn't take away the hope she carried. One weekend, while at the market, he noticed a stall selling second-hand electronics. Among the pile of tangled wires and broken headphones, he spotted a small speaker from an old gadget. It looked close enough to the one the bird needed. He bought it with a few coins he had left after groceries. Back home, he carefully soldered the wires, connecting the new piece. His hands shook as he worked, not just from nerves but also from exhaustion. Hours passed, but finally everything was in place. He pressed the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint click. The bird's eyes flickered with a dim light before going out again. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it was enough to make him believe. His daughter saw it too. She gasped and hugged him tightly, whispering, "It's waking up." Her excitement was contagious. He laughed, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time, it didn't feel impossible. From then on, the bird became their shared project. She would hand him tools, ask questions, and cheer every small success. At night, when the house grew quiet, he kept at it, practicing patience and persistence. Each step forward was slow, but it mattered. The bird, once a piece of forgotten junk, was slowly transforming into something else. It wasn't just wires and circuits anymore. It was a symbol of love, determination, and second chances. And though it still hadn't sung, the father and his daughter both believed that day was coming. They didn't know it yet, but the bird was more than just a toy. It carried a history neither of them understood, a connection to a story that was waiting to unfold. For now, though, all they saw was hope, shining in the small flicker of light in its tiny eyes. She was the kind of person everyone saw as strong. On the outside, she wore confidence like a well-fitted coat. Her words in board meetings were sharp, her decisions quick, and her reputation flawless. People called her one of the most successful leaders in the tech world, a woman who built an empire out of innovation. But behind the closed doors of her apartment, there was no empire, only silence, and a wound that never healed. Her husband had been the one who dreamed bigger than anyone she knew. He was an engineer with ideas that sounded impossible until he brought them to life. Where she dealt with numbers, contracts, and strategy, he dealt with imagination. They had been a team, each completing the other in ways no one else could. But dreams don't protect anyone from loss. He had fallen sick suddenly, and within months he was gone. She had stood in hospital corridors, her phone buzzing endlessly with work updates, while her world collapsed in front of her. She had buried him quietly, without the headlines or cameras that usually followed her. Only a handful of close friends came, because she couldn't bear for the world to see her broken. The only thing he left behind was unfinished work. In his workshop, scattered across a desk, was the project he had poured his heart into, a small, delicate AI bird. He had once told her it was meant for her, a way to remind her that even when he wasn't around, she would never feel alone. The bird, he said, would sing songs, respond to her voice, and carry tiny traces of his personality in its programming. She couldn't bring herself to touch it. The first time she walked into that workshop after his death, the sight of the half-finished bird shattered her. Its wings were unpainted, its circuits half exposed, and its eyes dark. It looked incomplete, fragile, almost as if it had died with him. She had picked it up once, but her hand shook so badly she set it back down and walked away. Months passed, then years. The bird stayed hidden in the corner, gathering dust. She never threw it out, though. She couldn't. It was his last gift, even if unfinished. Just looking at it made her chest tighten, so she kept the room locked, avoiding it completely. To the world, she became stronger than ever. She buried herself in work, building her company higher, faster, further than anyone expected. Awards piled up, investors praised her brilliance, and employees admired her leadership. But when she returned home at night, the silence pressed against her like a heavy blanket. There were moments she thought she heard his voice in the empty apartment. Other times, she caught herself reaching for her phone to tell him about her day, only to remember. The world saw a powerful woman. She only felt like a widow. She carried her grief quietly. No one dared ask about it, not even her closest colleagues. They all assumed her strength came from ambition, not realizing it came from survival. Every morning she put on her armor of confidence, but every night she took it off and faced the ache she couldn't escape. One evening, after a long day at work, she unlocked the workshop door for the first time in months. Dust floated in the air, and the smell of old wires lingered. She stood in front of the desk, staring at the small bird. Its paint had faded, its tiny frame looked abandoned. She touched it gently, her fingers brushing the cold metal. She whispered, "I'm sorry." Sorry that she hadn't been able to finish what he started. Sorry that she hadn't been able to hold onto the piece of him he wanted her to keep. Sorry that she couldn't face the pain long enough to see it through. The bird didn't respond, of course. But the sight of it stayed with her long after she left the room. That night, she dreamed of her husband's laugh, of the way he used to promise her that no matter what happened, he would always find a way to be near her. She woke up with tears on her pillow. She didn't know it yet, but the bird's story wasn't finished. Somewhere across the city, in a small apartment, a single father and his daughter were working on a broken toy they had found. Piece by piece, they were giving life back to the creation she thought was gone forever. The man had no idea that the bird in his hands carried the weight of another person's love and grief. He only knew he wanted to see his daughter smile. But fate has strange ways of connecting people. While the father soldered circuits late into the night, and the little girl whispered encouragements to the silent bird, the CEO sat in her quiet apartment, unaware that soon, someone else's determination would bring back more than just a machine. It would bring back memories, unfinished love, and perhaps even a chance to heal. For now, she closed the workshop door again, the bird still resting in the shadows. She promised herself she wouldn't go back for a while. It was easier that way. Easier to bury the pain than to reopen it. But the past has a way of finding us when we least expect it. Nights had become a routine for the father. Once his daughter was asleep, he would clear a small space on the table, push aside the bills, and bring the little bird into the light. It sat there quietly, as if waiting for him, its body still scratched and worn. To anyone else it was junk, but to him it was more than a project. It was a promise. He wasn't a man of many resources. His tools were basic, most of them secondhand, and he didn't have the training of an engineer. But he had something that mattered more: patience, and the determination to not let his daughter down. Every evening he stayed up long after midnight, studying old repair guides, watching videos, and trying again when things failed. At first, progress was painfully slow. One day, he thought he had fixed the wing, only to see it snap back stiff again. Another night he tried connecting the wires for the eyes, but the light refused to shine. He grew frustrated, sometimes even angry at himself. But then he remembered his daughter's face, her small hands holding the bird gently, as if it were alive. That memory was enough to keep him going. Bit by bit, the bird began to change. He polished its dented wings until they could move more freely. He replaced a cracked joint with a piece from an old clock he had taken apart. He found a wire that fit perfectly from a broken radio. Each small fix gave him hope. The first real breakthrough came late one night. He had been working on the power system, carefully connecting the tiny battery he managed to repair. When he pressed the button, the bird's eyes flickered faintly, only for a second, and then it went dark again. But it was enough. He sat back in his chair, stunned, a smile breaking across his tired face. The next morning, his daughter saw it too. When he showed her the little flicker of light, her joy was so pure that she laughed and hugged him tightly. "It's alive. I knew you could do it," she cried. That single moment made all the long nights worth it. From then on, the bird wasn't just his project, it became theirs. She would sit beside him, handing him screws, asking questions, and cheering at every small success. Sometimes she would fall asleep at the table, her head resting on her arms while he kept working. He would gently carry her to bed and then return, driven by the sound of her earlier laughter. But the hardest challenge was the voice box. The bird was meant to sing and chirp, maybe even respond to sounds. Its tiny speaker was broken, and the delicate circuits inside were badly damaged. No matter how many times he tried, the bird remained silent. One weekend, while walking through a flea market, he spotted a stall selling broken electronics. Digging through the pile, he found a tiny speaker from an old music player. It was scratched but intact. He bought it with the last bit of change he had in his pocket, hoping it would fit. Back home, he carefully soldered the wires, connecting the new piece. His hands trembled, not just from the heat of the iron, but from the weight of the moment. He adjusted the circuits, wiped the sweat from his brow, and finally pressed the switch. There was a click, then a faint sound. It wasn't a full chirp, just a broken note, but it was sound. He froze, staring at the bird as its eyes flickered again. For the first time, it wasn't silent anymore. His daughter squealed with delight, clapping her hands. She leaned in close, whispering to the bird, "You can do it. Sing again." Her belief was so strong that the father felt it in his chest like a spark of hope. The bird still wasn't fully restored, but it was no longer lifeless. It was waking up. Night after night, he kept improving it. He replaced the wiring with scraps from old toys. He coded small commands, learning slowly how to make the bird respond to basic sounds. It was clumsy, it was imperfect, but it was progress. The bird flapped its wings now, tilted its head, and chirped faintly when the little girl laughed near it. Their small home, once filled with silence, now had a new rhythm. The clinking of tools, the laughter of a child, the soft mechanical chirps of a bird coming back to life. One evening, as he sat back in his chair, exhausted but proud, he realized something. This wasn't just about fixing a toy. It was about proving that broken things could be whole again. It was about showing his daughter that even when life falls apart, with enough care, something beautiful can still be built from the pieces. What he didn't know was that this little bird wasn't just any toy. It was a creation born out of love, designed by someone far away who had poured his heart into it. Somewhere in the city, that person's widow still carried the pain of losing him, still unable to face the bird that had been meant for her. Fate had quietly placed it in the hands of a father who refused to give up, and a child who believed in it with all her heart. And now, the bird was finding its way back, not just to life, but to the story it had been created for. The father looked at the bird one last time before turning off the light. Its eyes flickered faintly in the dark, like a heartbeat. He smiled to himself. The restoration wasn't finished, but it was close. And when it was complete, he had no idea how deeply it would change not just his life, but someone else's too. Word spreads in strange ways, sometimes through neighbors talking, sometimes through small whispers in unexpected places. For the father, it started when a local repair shop owner noticed him buying small screws and spare wires week after week. Curious, the shopkeeper asked what he was building. The father, a little shy, explained that he was trying to fix a small robotic bird for his daughter. The shopkeeper smiled and said, "That's no ordinary toy. That looks like one of those special prototypes. I've only seen a few around, and they weren't cheap." The father didn't think much of it at the time. To him, it didn't matter if the bird was expensive or rare. What mattered was the way his daughter's eyes lit up every time it moved a little closer to life. Still, the words "special prototype" lingered in his mind. A week later, while testing the bird outside on the park bench, something unexpected happened. The bird chirped louder than before and flapped its wings twice. It was clumsy, but it worked. His daughter clapped, laughing as she leaned close to it. A passerby, who happened to work in the tech industry, noticed. They paused, surprised. "Where did you get that?" they asked, staring at the bird. The father hesitated, unsure what to say. "It was broken. We found it and fixed it up." The stranger nodded slowly, clearly recognizing something. They didn't say more, but later that evening, an email landed in the inbox of someone powerful, a CEO who had once locked away the very same bird in a dusty room, too heartbroken to finish it. When she first saw the message, the CEO almost deleted it. But the words "AI bird prototype" caught her attention. Her chest tightened as she clicked it open. The email was brief. "Someone seems to have restored a small AI bird in the city. It looks a lot like the project your husband once worked on." Her breath caught. She hadn't thought about that bird in months. She had forced herself not to. But now, reading those words, her hands trembled. Could it be possible? Could the bird she had locked away, the one her husband had poured his soul into, have found its way back somehow? She couldn't ignore it. She arranged a quiet meeting through her assistant, tracking down the father's address. She wanted to see it with her own eyes. The day she arrived, the father was surprised to find a woman at his door, dressed neatly, with an air of calm authority. He didn't recognize her. She introduced herself simply, without mentioning her title or company. "I heard you've been working on a very special bird," she said gently. The father, unsure, invited her in. His daughter clutched the bird in her hands, looking at the stranger with curiosity. The woman's eyes immediately locked onto the bird. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she forgot to speak. There it was, the same bird her husband had once promised to finish. The same delicate shape, the same small frame, now alive with faint light and sound. She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Where did you find this?" The father explained everything. How his daughter had spotted it near a donation center, how it was broken, how he had spent months fixing it bit by bit. He spoke humbly, not realizing the weight of what he was saying. To him, it was just a story of persistence. To her, it was like hearing a message from the past. Her eyes filled with tears. She reached out, almost afraid to touch it. The little bird chirped softly, tilting its head as if recognizing her. That simple sound broke her. She covered her mouth, trying to hold back the flood of emotions. The father and his daughter watched quietly, not fully understanding. To them, she was just a stranger reacting to a small toy. But for her, this was the last gift of her husband, brought back to life by the hands of someone who didn't even know the history behind it. She finally spoke, her voice trembling. "This bird, it was meant for me. My husband was building it before he passed away. I thought it was gone forever." The room grew still. The father looked at the bird, then at her, realizing for the first time that this wasn't just a project. It carried a story deeper than he had imagined. His daughter, innocent and curious, asked softly, "It was yours?" The woman nodded, smiling through tears. "Yes, it was supposed to be mine. But now, it seems like it belonged to both of you for a reason." The father didn't know what to say. He felt a mixture of pride and humility. He had only wanted to fix something for his daughter, to prove that broken things could be made whole. He never imagined it would mean so much to someone else. For the woman, seeing the bird alive again wasn't just about technology. It was about facing the grief she had buried for so long. It was proof that love could echo beyond loss, that her husband's dream hadn't died completely with him. The little bird chirped again, louder this time, almost as if it understood the connection unfolding around it. The daughter giggled, stroking its wings. The father sat quietly, watching the woman's tears turn into a faint smile. That day, in a modest apartment, 3 lives touched each other in an unexpected way. A single father, a little girl, and a grieving widow were connected through a fragile creation that refused to be forgotten. None of them could have planned it. But sometimes, life brings together broken pieces, not by accident, but by design. The room was quiet after the bird's soft chirp faded, but it wasn't the kind of silence that weighed heavy. It was the kind that carried meaning, the kind that filled every person there with a feeling they couldn't quite explain. The woman wiped her tears, embarrassed for a moment, but the father shook his head. "You don't need to hide it," he said gently. He wasn't a man of many words, but in that moment, he knew she needed to hear it. She looked down at the bird again. It tilted its head, as if waiting for her. "I never thought I'd see it again," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but her eyes softened as she watched the little machine move. "It feels like he's here just for a moment." His daughter leaned closer, curious, but also respectful in the way children sometimes are without being told. "My dad fixed it," she said proudly. Her smile was wide, but her eyes were tender. She didn't know the full weight of what the bird meant, but she understood that it mattered deeply to this stranger. The father sat back, quietly reflecting. For him, the bird had started as a simple promise to his daughter. But now he realized it was much more. He hadn't just restored wires and circuits. He had unknowingly restored a piece of someone's heart. The woman, who had spent years building walls around her grief, felt them crumble. For so long, she had buried the memory of the bird because facing it meant facing the loss of her husband. But now, seeing it alive, chirping softly, she didn't feel the same sharp pain. Instead, she felt something gentler, a reminder that love doesn't disappear, even if the person does. "I used to think I couldn't look at it," she admitted, her eyes distant as if speaking to herself. "It hurt too much. But maybe it wasn't meant to stay hidden." The father didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded. Sometimes silence was the most respectful answer. His daughter, however, spoke up with a kind of honesty only children have. "Maybe it was waiting for you," she said. The woman's lips curved into a small smile. She reached out and gently stroked the bird's wing. Maybe it was. In that moment, something unspoken passed between all three of them. The father understood her grief in a way, though his story was different. He too had lost, had carried the weight of being left behind. She, on the other hand, saw in him a quiet strength, a man who had taken brokenness and turned it into hope for his child. The bird, fragile yet alive, was proof of that hope. Over the next hour, they talked. Not about business, not about companies or success. They talked about life, about loss, about the ways people carry pain differently. She shared memories of her husband, how he used to stay up late tinkering with projects, always smiling when something finally worked. The father shared how he stayed up late too, not because he loved machines, but because he wanted to see his daughter's joy. The stories, though different, echoed each other. Both were about love expressed through small acts of dedication. Both were about people trying to hold onto something that mattered. When the woman finally stood to leave, the bird chirped again, as if saying goodbye. She hesitated, her hand lingering over it. "It belongs to you now," she said softly, looking at the father and his daughter. "You brought it back." "I couldn't." The father shook his head. "No, it was meant for you. I just fixed it." She smiled sadly. "Maybe it was meant for both of us. For all of us." She left quietly, but her steps were lighter than they had been in years. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt a part of him with her, not as pain, but as comfort. The bird song had reminded her that even though life changes, love leaves traces that can't be erased. In the days that followed, she visited again, sometimes just to see the bird, sometimes to sit and talk. Slowly, a friendship grew between her and the small family. She brought spare parts one day, surprised to find herself laughing as the little girl showed her drawings of the bird flying through the clouds. The father, who had once felt alone in his quiet struggles, found comfort too. He realized that healing wasn't only about fixing broken objects, it was also about letting people in, even when you didn't think you needed them. Together, they created new memories around the bird. What was once a symbol of unfinished love became something larger, a bridge between people who had lost and people who dared to hope again. The little girl never stopped believing the bird was magical. And maybe in a way it was, not because of its wires or coding, but because of the way it carried hearts back to life. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the bird chirped its soft tune, the father looked around his small living room. His daughter was laughing with the woman, the bird perched on the table between them. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, a deep sense of peace. The bird, once discarded and broken, had done more than come back to life. It had restored something in all of them. It had reminded them that love doesn't end. It changes shape, but it never disappears. And in that small home, filled with laughter and quiet healing, they all knew one truth: even broken things can carry hope.